referring to the malzoom by the lazim, this is when one thing requires another. So that which is accompanying something else, you refer to the one by the other. هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء? Literally, the disciples, the Hawariyun, they ask Jesus, is your Lord able to send down for us a table spread with food from heaven? And that's not what's meant. I mean, obviously they know that Allah has the power to do that. But it's like, will He? Sometimes you have this, when somebody wants to be very literal, you ask them, could you pass me that towel? And they say, well, I could if I wanted to. And then you say, oh, will you pass me that towel? So something similar, a use of language. I mean, will Allah send down for us a table? And then referring to the outcome by its cause. In verse 20 of Surah Hud, مَا كَانُوا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ السَّمْعَ وَمَا كَانُوا يُبْصِرُونَ. Speaking about the disbelievers, they could not hear, and they used not to see. So, in other words, they were unable to accept the message. So, hearing here is used to refer to acceptance. They could physically hear the message, but they weren't willing to accept it. They didn't listen willingly. And then the opposite of that is referring to the cause by its outcome. وَيُنَزِّلُ لَكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ رِزْقًا. He sends down for you provision from the sky. In Surah Ghafir, verse 13. And what Allah is sending down is the rain, and then the rain causes crops to grow, and the provision, sustenance, is in the crops. And then referring to someone by what he or they used to be. وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَ أَمْوَالَهُم, verse 2 of Surah An-Nisa. Give to orphans their wealth. Giving them their wealth is done when they attain the age of majority, when they become adults. Whatever is left from what the trustee has been spending, the guardian of that orphan has been spending on that orphan out of the orphan's wealth. If the trustee is needy, he can't afford to support the orphan himself, he's spending out of his wealth. That's not what's really intended there. It's whatever is left of the orphan's wealth when the orphan becomes an adult should be given to them. And at that point, they're no longer an orphan, because an orphan is by definition a child. That may not be clear to you, but this one is quite clear. Talking about divorce, if you've divorced women and they reach their term, فَلَا تَعْضُلُوهُنَّ أَنْ يَنْكِحْنَ أَزْوَاجَهُنَّ. And when you've divorced women and they've fulfilled their term, do not place difficulties in the way of their marrying their husbands, if they agree among themselves on a reasonable basis. Verse 232 of Surah Al-Baqarah. So, marrying their husbands, well, and that's what's called tahsil al-hasil. I mean, if you want to be literal about it, what that means is remarrying their ex-husbands. And I mean, that's the dominant interpretation of the verse. And so they're not their husbands until they've actually married them. So it's referring to that person as a husband before he's actually the husband. And referring to someone or something by what they or it will become. Nuh, when he makes dua against his people, he says, وَلَا يَلِدُ إِلَّا فَاجِرًا كَفَّارًا. In other words, he's saying if you leave them, they'll mislead your slaves, and they will beget none but lewd ingrates. Now, kafara is someone who's intense in their ingratitude and also in their disbelief. In the Islamic context, kufr, as we mentioned, that's the haqiqi meaning. It's the Sharia haqiqi meaning of kufr. So the children, of course, are born al-fitra. They are born innocent. But the parents are so corrupt that there is no expectation that the children will grow up undamaged. They're going to be also turned into carbon copies of their parents. That's what Nuh was saying. And then in the story of Yusuf, when the two men join him in the prison, one of them says, "Inni arani a'siru khamra." They're telling him their dreams. One of them says, "I dreamt that I was pressing wine." So, of course, anything can happen in a dream, but normally when you press grapes, you get grape juice, and then that turns into wine. But it's being pressed in order to get wine, so just cut to the chase, pressing wine. And then referring to the occupier of a space or time by that which it occupies, or he occupies. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ ابْيَضَّتْ وُجُوهُهُمْ فَفِي رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. And as for those whose faces have been whitened or brightened, in the mercy of Allah they will dwell forever. So, paradise is the physical concrete realization of Allah's mercy. I mean, you can express it in different ways. In a hadith, the hadith Qudsi, where Allah, He addresses the fire and He says, "You are my anger," and He addresses the paradise and He says, "You are my mercy." And so, the mercy of Allah is present in paradise. That's in verse 107 of Surah Al Imran. And then in Surah Saba, verse 33, when the people are disputing in the hellfire, and the followers are blaming the leaders, and they say, "Bal makrul layli wan nahar." Nay, but the scheming of the night and day. Literally, the scheming is attributed to the night and the day. But obviously it means those people scheming during the night and the day. And then the flip side of that, or the inverse of that, referring to the occupiers of a space by the space. وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ الَّتِي كُنَّا فِيهَا. That's a classic example. Qarya meaning a township. The buildings are the actual qarya. And then some disputed with that. They said, no, qarya is the buildings and its people. And so the asking, of course, is diverted to that which can respond, which is the people who live there. Another example given in this, again in Surah Al-Alaq, talking about Abu Jahl, فَلْيَدْعُ نَادِيَهُ. Then let him call upon his nadia. The nadia is the place where people gather to hang out, to chat. And so what's meant there is all the people who hang out with him. When he's being dragged off to hell, let him call his friends for help. And then you have referring to something by its opposite. And this repeatedly in the Quran, فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Give them the glad tidings of a painful punishment. Literally, tabshir means to give good news. And here it's being used for irony. because, and this is, again, some of the intricacy of the Quran. Why is it called bashara? I mean, it comes from a word that's related to the word for skin. And the connection is that, when you get really good news, you feel tingling on your skin, you get goosebumps. And so, of course, what happens to your skin in hellfire is that every time it gets burnt so that you can't feel anything, then the nerves are renewed. You get a new layer of skin with its new nerve endings to taste the punishment. So, it's being used in that way rhetorically. Now, somebody, without knowledge of Arabic, they came upon this and they said, "Oh, this is a linguistic error in the Quran." It's not an error. Okay, attributing an action to something by way of similarity. The classic example, فَوَجَدَ فِيهَا جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَنْقَضَّ فَأَقَامَهُ. And they found therein a wall upon the point of falling into ruin, and Al-Khidr repaired it. In Surah Al-Kahf, verse 77. Now, يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَنْقَضَّ means the wall, it's talking about the wall, found the wall intending to fall down. Yuridu, intention. So do inanimate objects have intentions? I mean, if you want to really argue about it, you can argue, but in our frame of reference, no, they don't. If they had wills, then they would be held accountable for their actions, which they're not. Okay, the use of a verb when the intent is almost. It says in Surah Talaq, verse 2, فَإِذَا بَلَغْنَا أَجَلَهُنَّ فَأَمْسِكُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ فَارِقُوهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ. Then when they've reached their term, take them back in kindness or part from them in kindness. So this is, if you take the verse literally, it means that when their iddah has expired, then either take them back or let them go. Well, at that point, if the iddah has expired, that's it. They're already separated from you, and it's not up to you to take them back. So what it means is that when the iddah is about to expire, that's your last chance. You can take your divorced wife back at that point, or just let the iddah expire, and then she's completely divorced from you. يعني البينونة الصغرى, as they call it. And then another example, it says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق. Now the verb being used here is a past tense verb, قمتم, when you have stood for prayer, when you're standing for prayer, either, and of course it's a jumla shartiyya, so past and present don't really have their normal meanings here. However, it is not a necessity that you make wudu when the iqamah is called for the salah. You already made the wudu when the adhan was called, so you don't have to make it again. So it's the wording is not to be taken in its strictly literal sense. And a similar passage with regard to the seeking refuge from shaitan when you're reciting Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فإذا قرأت القرآن فاستعذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. And when you recite the Quran, seek refuge in Allah from Satan, the outcast. The wording might give someone, if they were taking it very literally, since it mentions the recitation of the Quran first, and then it mentions seeking refuge from shaitan, it might give someone the impression that after you finished reciting the Quran, then you say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, and that's not what's intended. And then inversion of word order. ثم دنا فتدلى in Surah An-Najm, verse 7, talking about Jibreel. Then he drew near and came down. So actually, came down first, and then he drew near. Use of the plural to refer to what is singular. In Surah Al-Mu'minun, حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت قال رب ارجعون. Until when death comes to one of them, he says, "My Lord, send me back." Okay, so my Lord, it's being addressed to my Lord. Irji'un, that's being addressed to a group. And so then, there's different explanations for why that is. Some say it's actually referring to the angels. And I haven't actually read the TAFSIIR in detail, so I can't comment any further. Another example of that in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَإِذْ قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا وَاللَّهُ مُخْرِجٌ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْتُمُونَ. When you, and here it's addressing the Jews as a whole, when you killed a soul, and then there was a dispute about it, and then Allah was going to bring out what you concealed. So the person who did the killing and the person who did the concealing was just one person. So that's a majazi use of plural there. Sometimes the plural is used for the dual. فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُ إِخْوَةٌ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ. And if he had brothers and or sisters, his mother gets 1/6 of the inheritance. Now, ikhwa is different from akhawain. Ikhwa would normally mean 3 or more, but with the exception of Ibn Abbas, everybody else, all the other scholars among the Sahaba, they agreed that even if there are 2 siblings, then this rule applies. This verse 11 from Surah An-Nisa. And then famous example in Surah At-Tahrim, إِن تَتُوبَا إِلَى اللَّهِ فَقَدْ صَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. If the two of you, meaning Aisha and Hafsa, turn to Allah repentant, here Pixel, he adds something. You have cause to do so. And then returning to the actual wording, for your hearts have deviated. لَقَدْ صَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. Now, 2 people are being addressed. Kuma, the pronoun, is referring back to those 2 wives, but it doesn't say qalbakuma, your 2 hearts. It says qulub ukuma. So they didn't have 3 hearts between the 2 of them. So this is tajawuz. It's using the plural where technically a dual should have been used.